they listen to their customers closely, and they don't look for yes or no answers or scale of 1 to 5 responses. They look in between the lines, and they learn exactly, why are you working with us? Why? What is it? You know, not not the standard answers of, well, your value is good, or your quality is above average. Okay, nobody's motivated by that. But why do you work with us? What is it? And if you can get to that as a company, you start to learn, again, like I said earlier, what you don't want to change, what you must maintain, but you start to learn more about your customer and what's important to them. So that's one thing. Another thing I think on that vein is that you look at your customers not as demographic people, let's say demographics, how much money they make or that kind of thing. Look at them also from a psychographic mindset. The way they live their life or what's important to them. We worked with a church insurance company, and they said, hey, we have a bunch of different kinds of demographics for the people who buy our insurance for their churches. So sometimes it's the volunteer worker at a small church. Sometimes it's a lady making very low amount of money. You know, it's kind of an entry-level job. Sometimes it's the minister. Sometimes it's the COO of a mega church. So our client said, there's no way to figure these people out. And we said, well, there is one way. They all are exactly the same in one way, and that is their psychographic is they are here to protect their church. It doesn't matter if they're rich, doesn't matter if they're on food stamps, it doesn't matter if it's a mega church. They are protectors of the church. And your brand, their brand in this case, was very attractive because that's all they worked with, churches. And all of their agents who represented their products were elders at churches. So one thing we said to them was, you cannot change the fact that you require elders to be the people who represent your product, because they were about to do that. They wanted to go more, generic. So you look at so big first step is the customer psychographic. What are you doing that makes them go, you know what, I want to work with Chris. I love him. I love his team. I got to work with that guy, because you don't want to lose that. So that's the first thing I would recommend they do. Look at the customer and find out exactly why they're working with you.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And it's interesting that, because like you said, it then bridges the gap between all of the different demographics you're talking about. So it becomes this kind of overarching sort of narrative story that tells the brand story. And I guess then you can still then dive in, if you want to, into different segments or demographics that you can highlight even further on those sort of marketing campaigns. But the overarching message is going to hit and resonate with everyone pretty much. So from that side of things, what are some interesting sort of projects you've worked on when it came to differentiation, and what are some that have been surprising in terms of what you found and some of the things that you've utilized as that differentiation point?
One of the companies we talked to and we work with still to this day is a company that is a copper rod producer. So again, sometimes they're not the most exciting sounding businesses, but the thing is, to the people working there, it's an exciting business, okay? So a lot of agencies will kind of go, yeah, it's not that exciting. So we look at these really, we think they're exciting, that kind of a company. And they had a very awkward name because they were a combination of two companies. They were kind of the offspring of a steel company and an offspring of a Spanish copper rod producer. So the name was very awkward. And when we were talking to their customers doing interviews, one of our questions was, what do you call these people? And they had a wide range of names for that company, probably a half dozen different names. So they would call them this, they call them that. Well, that's not good. You kind of want your company to have one name, So we found that they really had no firm identity. Their leader, and this is one of the things that I think is really critical, their leader was courageous. And he said, I want us to have our own name. I want our own identity. Now, a lot of leaders would say, look, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to either spend the money or the time, and I don't want to get the two parent companies upset. And he said, I don't care if they're upset. I'm running this company. We need our own identity. So as our company worked with them, we found out that normally copper rod production is not good for the environment, but in their case, they were very environmentally conscious and actually quite sustainable. So we found, wait a minute, that's a positive. And that's something that it was actually held as a negative in a way at first with their customers saying, well, you know, they do it this different way. Well, actually it was the most sustainable, environmentally friendly process to make copper rod in the world. So we thought, no, wait a minute, that sounds like a positive. As we worked with them, we also found out that they provided free services. So for instance, their engineering team would go into their clients' factories and plants to help them improve their machinery to better produce the product my client was shipping them. So I thought, well, wait a minute, that's positive. So we highlighted their engineering group. And we culminated all of this with coming up with a name. So we named them Copper Works, one word, Copper Works. And their slogan and their mantra is, this is where copper works. So they have this big building in a tiny town, and they repainted this 250,000 square foot building with their new logo and their slogan, this is where copper works. They then launched it virtually because it was during COVID to all 100 plus employees, and they sent all of them a package to their home, said, don't open it up until we tell you, get on the Zoom meeting and let's all watch this together. And they opened up their packages on as they were told to do it on demand, hey, go do it. And they found, you know, the new logo, the new name on beer, on a cap, lots of things. And it was a tremendously inspiring moment that gave that company its own name. So I called the president back a few months later on something, and I referred to them by their old name to him. And he interrupted me, he says, Barry, that's not who we are. We're Copper Works. We're Copper Works. I thought, you know, I love that. So that's an example of a company that had no identity, but was really producing something valuable. And we really focused on the concept of their people, because really, if you think about Copper Works, this is where copper works. We're the people making copper work for you. So that's an example of a company. Another example is we work in the ambulance industry in the United States. And one thing, and this is really an important thing, this ambulance company is a tremendous company. I talked to one of their workers on the plant, on the factory line, and I said, what do you do? And he goes, I plug in wire harnesses. I said, okay. I said, what else? He said, that's it, plug in wire harnesses. So, okay. And he said, and I'm thinking of taking a job down the street for 25 cents more an hour. I said, okay. And I said, okay, so let's think about this. I said, your ambulances have a life of about 10 years. And he goes, yeah, it's about right. I said, okay, in those 10 years, all the runs and all the travel they do will equate to about 100,000 lives that they protect or help save in that ambulance. That ambulance is worth 100,000 lives in a 10-year period. So he stopped for a second and he went, I never thought I was in the life-saving business. I said, well, maybe you are, because if you think about it, if you don't plug that in right, and an ambulance stops in the middle of an intersection, it might be one of the 4,000 ambulance car accidents that happen every year in the United States. You know, people could die from that, let alone not get to the hospital on time. And he said, you know, I've never looked at what I do as helping to save lives. Well, if you think about that, Chris, just as an example, and all the folks listening here, it's not just feel-good discussion. It's giving him an opportunity to realize there's some significance to what he does, number one. Number two, it probably increases his retention, because if everything's equal, I'd rather save lives than go work at a factory down the street making, grills or something, whatever it was. And the other thing is, it's something that could be attractive to new recruits to the company. Hey, we're here to help save lives. And, one of the interesting statistics is every 2 seconds in the United States, an ambulance is dispatched to some location. Every 2 seconds. So I talked to the kid for like 5 minutes, and I said, think about it. Hundreds of ambulances have been dispatched in the little bit of time you and I've talked. That's how important what you're doing is. So those kinds of examples are not just feel good. They're smart, but they're true. They're accurate. You're doing something of value. So let's celebrate it. Let's identify it. Let's promote it. And, let's feel good about our team doing it. So those are I guess I would say a couple of examples.
I love those. I think the Copperworks one's amazing, because it kind of, I can imagine how much that would give them an identity. So they actually got an identity now. They can use that, they embody it and they become it. I like the idea of sending out those packages to the workforce so they can open it all together. And the ambulance example reminded me of when the moon landings were happening, and someone went to Cape Canaveral. I think it might have been, I'm not too sure if it was JFK or if it was after JFK, but someone went to Cape Canaveral and said, asked the janitor, what do you do? And he said, I'm putting someone on the moon, just by what they were doing. So they were part of that mission, that process. And I think it's really important to have that and to highlight that for people. I noticed on your site there was a series which was differentiation series, and I thought it was really cool. And I just wondered if there's any uncommon ways that you can differentiate your brand to stand out from the competition. Any areas that you can find differentiation that you wouldn't expect?
I think there are numerous ways to highlight your differentiation. So one thing that comes to mind is if you have a technology or a technological product, you need to very seriously consider promoting it using technology. So as an example, if you've created a brilliantly designed new product with incredible advanced technology that does incredible things, isn't it kind of crazy to print a brochure about it? I mean, think about it. Wouldn't it be better to create augmented reality where somebody can point their phone and see this come to life? And in many cases, we really try to urge our clients, if they're technologically based, to use technology. And there's a kind of a secret benefit to it. And here's one of the secret benefits. If your product is technologically based and you have a distribution or dealer network, and you come up with a technology that can demonstrate it, you're actually going to help make sure that the people who are supporting and representing your product know how to use the technology. Because in many cases, you have non-technological people going, yeah, here it is. You're losing sales. So one thing we really think is a special thing to do is utilizing technology to bring to life what you do. So, and then on one other kind of spin-off of that, Chris, sometimes you have products that are doing things that you don't see with the eye, but through technology, you can show it. So we work with a company that created a ultraviolet light technology that would actually fight COVID, all the molecules in the air. They would render COVID useless and kill COVID in a certain area. So they said, but their problem was they said it would do it and it did it, but nobody could prove it did it until they later would conduct tests. So we said, okay, let's show it using technology. So we created an animation that showed people, here's a room, here are all the COVID molecules floating all around. Here's our device that's in there. You turn the device on and you see how it's slowly eradicating those molecules. So another facet using technology is to show things that you cannot usually see so that people really appreciate it. So that's another aspect I would suggest.